Hi, my name is Tom Luyten, and I will talk to you today about interactive art in elderly care. A little bit about my background. I did my master's in Genk in Belgium, where I designed an interactive multisensory room because I was curious on how multisensory rooms could be fitted with sensors and made smarter for the people who live with cognitive disabilities. And this transferred into a PhD research later on, which specialized in interactive art installations for people who live with dementia and elderly care in general. I'm also active as a media artist. I teach at the Maastricht Institute of Arts, and I founded a company called Venster, which is Dutch for window, and I will talk about that later as well. The thing I saw when I was walking around in elderly care homes, mainly in Holland, is that technology is omnipresent. It's everywhere. There's sensors everywhere. There's trackers everywhere. And everything is designed with good intent. But most of the things I saw were mainly aimed at assisting, monitoring, or care and prevention of the people, and not so much at the way they experience their day, and not aimed at, for instance, culture or arts. One exception is the multisensory room, what we call snoezelruimte in Holland. It's a room where you can go and relax, and the senses are stimulated with different kind of lights and touch and etc. And the research on multisensory rooms is actually very positive, at least for when you are in a session in the multisensory room. It can be used to stimulate people who are understimulated, relax people who are overstimulated, etc. But as a designer and an artist, I had one huge problem when I walked into this kind of rooms, and that's that they look like the picture you see on the slide right now. They are, well, to say the least, they are ill-designed, which was weird to see for me, because as an artist and as a person who was just interested in arts and culture in general, I visit arts festivals, and there you see these kind of public art installations like Sensor Valley by Daan Rosegaarde, which you see on the right here. And in a lot of respect, they resemble these kind of modules that I saw in multisensory rooms, which you see on the left is this bubble unit. So there's this divide between why the aesthetic of the things we design for people who live with cognitive problems should be childish for some reason. And I do understand this thought error, because the people who live with cognitive problems, they don't have the cognitive level to understand all the interfaces that we use day to day. Maybe they are not able to use a laptop or a phone or other things we use every day, but are hard for them to understand. But the thought error that happens there is that this cognitive level of the interface is translated to the cognitive level of the aesthetic. It's not because it needs to be like childlike simple to use that it should look childish, I think. So with this mission, I set out to write my PhD, to start my PhD trajectory. It ended up being called The Art of Feeling Connected, and I set out to see whether interactive art could be actually used as an emotion-oriented care technology in nursing homes. Of course, the whole dissertation is available in full at this URL if you want to read up on it. I started out with understanding the problem. What is actually happening in these care units, but also how do people in general actually respond to interactive artworks? And to my surprise, there isn't a lot written about how people respond to interactive artworks. There's also the problem of focusing and scoping what an interactive artwork is. You can see that on the title of this paper I published. I needed to scope it to physical, open-ended, interactive digital artworks, because an interactive artwork can have a lot of appearances. But if you look at these types of artworks, which are basically just physical manifestations, like the bubble units you saw earlier, or the Sensory Valley installation by Daan Rosegaarde, it's a physical installation that doesn't have set rules to follow, or like a game-like structure that you need to win. It's just an open-ended interaction, like a multi-sensory room or like a snoozle room is. I only found 13 articles at the time, which was 2017, and in these 13 articles, they wrote about 22 artworks, and I'll go and discuss the findings that I saw. I categorized all the findings, all the responses of people to these interactive artworks into human-human responses and human artwork responses. Human-human responses are responses that happen between humans while they are interacting with the artwork. Human artwork responses are responses that happen between the human and the artwork, divided into verbal, physical, and cognitive or emotional responses, and then further divided into categories. And what you see is that when humans interact with an artwork like that, they mostly try to first figure out and try to understand how it works. So when you enter a room or you approach these kind of installations, exploring how this works is primary. This is a kind of learning curve, and if it's too steep, then frustration arises and people fail to understand how it works, and then they give up and they never enter the actual experience. So here already it became apparent that the interface of an artwork, an interactive artwork, is actually very important to be able to experience it in full. Other responses are of a physical nature. What do people physically do with the artwork? And there you see that there's a strong correlation with what we call affordance. And an affordance is what does an object look like it could be doing or used for. The affordance of a ball is that it can roll. So if I see a ball in an installation, an actual physical ball, I will try to roll it. The funny thing was that this also holds true for digital or projected balls or other objects. If I see a projected digital ball, I will also try to roll it, and not when it's a cube, I will not try to roll it, etc. When people are presented with abstracted content and they do not have like a mental model or a mental model to figure out what they need to do, they start using their whole body, waving around to figure out what the installation will give qua feedback, and then figure it out that way. If the installation is smaller, like tabletop, you see that the physical movements become smaller, more considered, and slower in pace, even more sensual. Lastly, large, dark, open spaces are a special category because there's no walls, they commit to the space a lot more, and they lose track of time when they're in there. Verbally, this actually underlines the previous things that people physically are doing anyway. They start to comment on how this might work, and they describe literally what they see also to figure out how the artwork works. Most of the time in these public interactive artworks, people are not alone, so there are human-human responses as well. Verbally, people start talking with each other. There are small discussions on how this works. They give instructions to each other and they start working together verbally. So this also means figuring out how this thing works, what the possibilities are, and what you can do with it. And physically, we see the same thing. So they interact together with or through the artwork. And if the content is abstract, they learn from each other by mimicking what others have been doing. It's nice to see that we are all very polite people when we're inside this kind of artworks and we coordinate our behavior. A peculiar one is that on cognitive emotional level, the presence of other people on the one hand can make it more complex. It's another layer of complexity and your focus is shifted. But it seems that if you know the people that you're interacting with together, the time of exploring becomes longer. So now we know how people in general react to these kind of open interactive artworks. And I started concepting on how can this be translated into this elderly care environment. And what I found out is that if you want to make an artistic piece for people who have also a hard time understanding interfaces and experiences, there's this sweet spot between artist-centered, an artist-centered approach or complete co-creation. Complete co-creation would mean that I ask the elderly to work with me completely and have them as a partner in the design process. Artist-centered means that I will be in charge completely. I think the sweet spot is in the middle, so I work together with them, but I make sure that I lead the way and make this conceptual framework in which they can co-create with me. The proof of the pudding is, of course, in the eating. So when this is clear, I started prototyping. One prototype I made is called Venster, which translates to window in English. It's a product, an installation that connects a closed ward of an elderly care home to the outside world by showing videos of interesting things that happen outside. And it's completely framed as if it were an actual real window. What this does is that it latches onto this mental model that's already present or still present even in people who live with dementia, and they understand how a window works. In general, it's very easy. You can just look outside and you can see things that you normally don't see, which translates into it's becoming a place where you can sit down by your own or with your visitors or with other people, and you have something to talk about because it shows you video of topics that spur the conversation. On the other hand, it can also create an environment in which you can just sit and stare and do nothing for a longer time, because we all know that when we are visiting people who live with dementia, sometimes it can be hard to keep a conversation going, and time can be against us. When we tested this prototype of Venster out, we saw that generically people recognized and talked out loud about what they saw, and they shared what they thought they recognized. The same as we saw in the general population interacting to installations. Also, the elderly start asking about the contents of the installation and how it works. They physically pointed or tapped. There was some music, so they sang and they ticked on the rhythm. One thing that actually did not happen that we envisioned was that there was almost no social interaction between residents, and this to this day remains very challenging to design. When we showed calming content, there was a very rapid loss of focus, even people falling asleep. Calming content is content that is mainly static, not much happening. Activating content, you can think of the carnival, animals, children. And this led to a group of 5 to 6 people to be generally calm and focused for up to an hour. And this was under the guidance of a non-professional caregiver. So this is very beneficial. And it opened up time for conversation because the other people were quiet and focused. There was time to have a one-on-one conversation. On top of that, we showed video of interesting places. So there was also topic for conversation. We also did some sessions with interactive content where you could tap the screen and try things out. These were very short sessions. There were a lot of interactions. This also means that it's very important to have a very good professional caregiver present because they need to manage the session and actually entertain the people to keep tapping the screen and trying things out. Venster was a very concrete prototype. It latches onto the mental model of an actual window. But I was also curious on how abstract can I make an installation to actually provide them with an abstract interactive art experience. And that's why I developed, after Venster, I developed Morgendauw, which translates to morning dew in English, which is also a physical digital installation that refers to the dew in the morning, where you can touch with all 10 fingers to create water drops that you can manipulate, and then they glide off the surface. First, we made this tabletop edition that you saw, which we took, of course, to the elderly care homes to test and iterate and co-create with the elderly to change the interaction so they could understand. And in the end, it ended up being a very large tabletop installation that you can see here, where particles come off the surface that have a color based on the temperature of the day, and even the direction of the particles is influenced by the wind strength and direction. And you can place either digitally 3D printed rocks on the surface, or you can use your hands to manipulate this stream of particles, and you can create a choreography of light and sound while doing this. So this experience really reminisces or refers to this snoozle experience that you have in this multisensory room, but then with a very mature art-like aesthetic. So this was the aim, the end aim for me to create an actual art experience that could be on an interface level be understood by people who live with dementia and their visitors and their caregivers. This installation ended up in Eindhoven in Holland, and in the end looked like this. And of course, we also did some observations on how people react to Morgendauw on site. And what we saw there was that at first, residents did not seem to notice Morgendauw at all, which was strange because it's a very large installation with light and sound. And we tested it thoroughly to see whether they could understand the interactions and the interface and whether they understood what Morgendauw was. What we overlooked was context. It was placed in a public hallway, and it was not clear that it was an artwork, and it was not clear that an artwork is, you can touch it, because normally art is not to be touched. What we did saw that if they were gestured towards it and made, a caregiver made them focus on it, immediately the interface was clear, and they started using it and started experimenting with it and enjoyed it very much. Most interactions last about 3 minutes, which is okay, especially in a public space. The interactions were slow, magic-like. The particles and interactions were closely studied, and they used both their hands and their rocks that were on the tabletop. So the takeaways for this are that autonomous use by people who live with dementia is almost impossible for most, unless there's like this interfaceless experience, like at Venster, where you can where there's actually no interface needed to experience it. You can just sit at the window and look outside. Otherwise, a volunteer or a visitor will always have to provide a minimum of assistance, which also means there's no professional needed, which is very beneficial. I think if you design these kinds of experience, you need to find a balance between artist-centered and pure co-creation. And the more active you make an experience, the more guidance and more professional quality is needed to make the session successful. Social interaction remains a challenge. All studied artworks here are conversational pieces and a place to come together, but they mainly interact with visitors and caregivers. Social interaction between residents remains very challenging. So if you make figurative art, make sure that your responses, or that you know that responses are linked to affordances. Content can be used as an interface, and recognition and mental models is the gate to a good experience. If you make abstract art, it's still very challenging, but it's not impossible. You can find a connection with existing mental models and expand together with them in co-creation. Context framing and an introduction of the work are very important. Currently, we are still developing Venster. It's become a commercial product. We are working on interactive cards with topics on them that you can use, place at the window, and it shows you the actual topic that's on the card. And we're developing a version where there is a VR glasses used with 360 video, in which the interface is like this, that you can just put the goggles on and the video starts playing, take the goggles off and the video stops. That's it for now. Thank you very much. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation and your questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Tom, for your sharing. So we will now move to Q&A session. So our first question would be, you mentioned it is important to find a balance between artist-centered and pure co-creation. So could you share more about your experience about that?
Yes, thank you for your question. So my experience is that co-creation is a very popular term the last couple of years, which is beneficial, of course, because I do agree that if you design something for someone, they should be included in the process, and preferably they should be included in the process as much as possible. The problem, however, is with people who live with dementia that, of course, due to the fact that they live with this cognitive impairment, they have trouble envisioning what they actually need. It's a very abstract, difficult question to ask them, what would you need to have a meaningful experience? Therefore, I think it's very important that an artist or a designer also takes the lead in this to a certain degree, meaning that she or he needs to set up a concept and make people actually dream and envision what could be possible, and also guide them towards this concept. What you see is that, especially for people who live with dementia, it's a very the point that you can include them in the process is when you start talking about content. So when the concept overall is clear, you can include them in the process, talking about what would you like to see, what in the case of Venster, what type of videos, what type of topics would you like to see and have included. We actually used activity card sort for that in this trajectory, which is a method where you show people cards that depict certain topics, and you always present two of them, and they can choose. Do you like animals more than, for instance, trains? And by repeating this process with different topics and also recycling topics a couple of times, you can get a focus on what are the desired topics for this target audience. So to summarize, I think the sweet spot is between this artist or designer centered approach, because if you just design or create something as an artist and you say like, this is my concept, the way it usually happens in this museum kind of context, which is fine, but there's like, this is my vision of the world, and if you like it, or you have something with it, or it does something with you, or it provides you an experience, that's fine. If that's not the case, it doesn't matter. There are other artworks you can go enjoy. I think it's also the responsibility of an artist that works in this gerontech that it needs to be understood by this target audience. So you need to include them. And it's searching for the sweet spot in the middle. Yeah.
Right. That's really important to know what the users really want to see, right? So the second question is about, in your study, there are different types of responses ranging from verbal reactions to active physical engagement for human artwork interaction. So what do you think are the successful factors from your observation, Tom?
Out of the literature, I learned that one of the most important things is, in general, when enjoying a physical interactive artwork, is figuring out the interface, understanding how this artwork works, what it wants from you, whether it sees you, whether there's this connection between the artwork and you can figure out what the intention is. And if that doesn't occur timely, people get frustrated and they will not engage with the artwork at all. And that's for people just visiting museums and festivals in general. And what we saw in the verbal and the physical reactions of the people who live with dementia when studying these artworks I developed is that the same thing holds true, but it's on steroids. It's much more important. Their thresholds to engage is very low. So when they encounter something, for instance, that doesn't fit the context, they will not see it. If they are invited to interact with the artwork, you can see that also for them, the verbal and physical reactions they show are all linked to what is this thing, how does it work, how can I figure out what to do with it. But their threshold for frustration is super, super, super low. So that's why Fenster, for instance, works very well because there's almost no interface. The only thing you can do is when you don't like the content you are shown, you can pull that little string and you see something else. And for the rest, you can just talk with each other about the things you see. For Morgenthau, this was much more of a challenge because we needed to search for these mental models and where they stop working when you abstract something. A mental model, when I ask a person who lives with dementia, put out your hands and I will pour water in it, they will make like a little bowl to catch the water because they still inherently like know how water responds and how nature responds. But what happens if you stretch that mental model and you stretch it to abstraction, and where does it like not correspond anymore? So Morgenthau was a slope and there was abstract water running down, and it was a lot of experimentation and co-creation and searching in interactive sessions where this spot lies of abstraction. But we now see that in Morgenthau, they understood that when I place my hands in a certain way, I can stop these particles running down and I can place these rocks. And the verbal and physical interactions that we saw actually proved the fact that they understood what was happening there.
So we have another participant asked about, are these results of the interactions like between human or between human and human, or between human and art, more of observational? Do you have any evidence-based study or plan for such study, Tom?
So we developed a framework ourselves, which divides when you have the observation. So what we did was, during the observation, we put down a camera that filmed the whole session, and afterwards we transcribed everything that happened. So every physical action that happened, people touching each other, people touching the artwork, people responding to the artwork verbally, or cognitive and emotional things that we saw happening. We transcribed everything and started coding it to make it more insightful. And then we placed it inside this framework that you also saw in my presentation, and that's also published, which divides everything into human artwork and human responses, and then divides it even further into verbal, physical, and emotional cognitive responses, which provides a framework for you to how do you say that, to structure everything that you see and hear during this session. For the cognitive emotional responses, of course, it's a little educated guesswork that we as researchers tried first ourselves with 3 of us, and we also cross-referenced everything that we did. But we also talked with the primal caregivers of the people to validate whether what we saw or that we thought we saw was actually the response that also fits the personality of the person that we were observing. So this whole protocol is actually described in my publication. So I would suggest going to my ResearchGate profile and find the publications on either Venster or Morgenthau. We did observations on both of them. And Cradle as well, which is a product that I did not develop, but I did observe, because it's also an interactive artwork based on sound. So that will be my suggestion if you're looking for a framework to do a session like this and structure the findings, and that will be the best place to find this information.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Hi there everyone, my name is Sarah Ticho, and I'm really delighted to join you today to talk about the role of arts and technology in healthcare for better pain management. So thank you so much for having me join you. I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of an introduction into who I am and what I do, and then some of the projects that I'm now involved in as well. So just as a bit of background, before I started working in virtual reality in healthcare, I actually studied anthropology at university. So I studied biological and social anthropology with a year in Japan. And it was just at the time that I was finishing university that my father became very unwell and actually died within 6 months of his diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. And it was just as I was graduating that I started to work in here in the UK at the National Healthcare Service, the NHS, doing referral management and reading all the stories of different patients that were coming through. But I was also not really enjoying the job very much. I think I found it really heartbreaking hearing the pain that people were in. And it was around that time that I also started to volunteer at an art gallery here in Brighton, where I'm from, a place called Fabrica Gallery, which, as you can see, is actually an old church where they would commission installations. And so this was an amazing artwork by an artist called Karina Kaikonen. And I would stand there in the gallery and talk to people about what this art meant to them. And the experience was all about grief and loss. And all of these shirts that you can see here were contributed to the gallery by volunteers and the local community. And it was all about the people that had inhabited these shirts and where they had sort of gone to afterwards. And I never really engaged in the world of art much before then, but I realized whilst by standing in this gallery that I could use the arts to be able to talk to people about things that are painful, that are difficult to describe, And these artworks were a way of starting conversations that perhaps wouldn't have happened otherwise. And it was then that I realized that storytelling was a kind of a world that I wanted to be more involved in. But I was still really struggling with my own grief. And it was a few years on that I became quite unwell and had a diagnosis for quite a severe type of a mental health problem. And it was when I was sort of standing in the doctor's office asking for help and being offered drugs when I actually felt like that wasn't what I needed at the moment, that I also realized that not just galleries and cinemas are spaces for storytelling, but actually being in a doctor's office is a place where we often need to tell our stories as well. And the statistic is that apparently on average, you have about 11 seconds to describe your condition to a doctor before you might be interrupted. So you want to explain very quickly what's going on so that they can understand you. But also the way that healthcare often works is that we obviously rely on these very standardized ways of assessing people's conditions. In this image here, this is a very standardized pain assessment form that's been used since the 70s, where you would mark onto a body where you might feel pain, and then on a scale of 1 to 10, try and find different ways of describing it. But sometimes it's really hard to put these things into words. In my case, it was more of a mental health condition than a physical health condition. But trying to find any of these words to describe things, to locate these things in your body, felt really challenging. And given the fact that I've been working in contemporary art, and then by this point had actually moved into working in film, then I became really interested in storytelling and ways of being able to describe things that are quite hard to put into words. And it was around this time that I actually discovered virtual reality. And I became really fascinated with how immersive technology was really starting to push the way that we understood the way that other people saw the world. So, for example, in this image, this is quite an old project now called A Machine to Be Another by a group called Be Another Lab in Barcelona. And what they were doing is that the man on the right, that's actually a camera attached to his head. And that view from his head, looking down at his body and seeing himself, was actually being live transmitted into the woman's headset, and that she would feel embodied within him. And actually, if you start to almost move in the same way as each other, after a while, it creates this really fascinating effect called the body transfer illusion, which makes somebody feel like they are in the body of somebody else. And they did really interesting research to see how that is actually kind of transforming empathy and how we connect with other people and can understand the different ways that we perceive the world. And there were so many other fascinating projects that I really started to dive into of how we could use virtual reality and immersive storytelling to see the world through somebody else's eyes, to see the pain and the way that they had perhaps been treated, or even experiencing their bodies in new ways. And so this really started for me, this journey into discovering how it was being used in that way, but also how VR is increasingly being used as a way of treating and managing pain as well. And so often VR has been used as a way of distracting people from pain in the moment, acute pain, of being able to reduce that feeling. And there's some really exciting work as well coming out about how VR can be used to reduce chronic pain as well, and lots of new research that's being expanded on. But a lot of that seemed very much about distracting people, trying to take people away from their bodies. And my interest was really in how can we use VR to perhaps even reconnect with our bodies in new ways. And so I ended up becoming a curator with a festival called the Big Anxiety Festival. There was an arts and mental health festival out in Australia. And I put on this big exhibition about virtual reality to talk about, understand, and even treat healthcare conditions. But it was also whilst I was there that I met this really fascinating researcher who told me about this arts and health research method called body mapping, which was originally developed in the 80s in South Africa for women living with HIV and AIDS to talk about their experience of living with their condition when they didn't have the words or language to describe it. So what they would traditionally do is go through a mindfulness experience, get people to reconnect with their bodies and think, what does my condition look like? How do I feel my condition in my body? Are there certain areas where I might have specific pain, or are there feelings that I might have trapped in my body? When you feel very stressed and anxious, do you have a kind of pit in your stomach? Do your hands shake? Does your head get hot? And how can you draw that and create these artworks as a way of talking about experience? This is actually in the top right hand corner. This is an image of me running a workshop back in Fabrica Gallery about 6 years after that exhibition. It was really exciting to come back and sort of have that journey come round. But I felt dissatisfied with this as a tool for expressing ourselves, because it felt very flat. I might have worked in the arts, but I'm not a very good artist, and was frustrated by my own ability to express myself. And so working in virtual reality and trying lots of really interesting experiences that involve 3D drawing, I was like, well, how can we push this more? How could we make this 3D? How could we bring the whole body into it, the skin inside the body, even outside the body as well? And so that's when I started to develop Hatsumi as my company. And so it's been a real process of thinking about how to translate this into a virtual reality experience. This was the first prototype that we created. So making a 3D avatar that you could illustrate on, and just creating a range of drawing tools that could be expressive of different types of experience. And we had people creating all sorts of artworks. So, for example, in this bottom left image, this is somebody telling their partner that they love them for the first time. And I really wish I had their voice recordings to share with you, but I don't, unfortunately, today. But you can see here that their cheeks are really red, and they described feeling embarrassed, that they had this kind of butterflies in their stomach, and that their chest, their heart felt like it was expanding and almost trying to embrace that other person within them. The top left is somebody drawing anxiety and feeling this kind of stress moving around their body. And then on the top right as well is a musician talking about the experience of making music, putting an idea out into the world, feeling it feed back to you, and how your body processes that. And then those sort of little lines on their arms are talking about those chills of excitement when you feel like you've really gotten something right. And then the bottom right one as well is somebody illustrating a dream. So this was the first sort of version of creating the experience that I thought was really exciting. And then we tried it out with different people with different types of conditions. So this is somebody with body dysmorphia, which means that they have quite a negative view of their body and see their body very differently to the way that other people do, and dealt with a lot of eating disorders, wore a lot of makeup, and it really impacted their mental health, and they were constantly consumed by how they looked. And so the image on the left shows them drawing happiness, joy, how they felt on a good day. And then on the right is them talking about their condition. And you can see they've like scribbled out their face, and they're talking about not wanting to be seen. And then those red lines are red arrows pointing at them. And they said that whenever they go into public, they just feel like people are watching them all the time. And then they had this sort of swirling in their stomach, and this sort of the dread and the stress, and how it was really impacting them. And it was interesting to see how these two artworks side by side, how different they are. And it's hard to see from this angle, but that picture of happiness and joy on the right, on the left even, none of that is embodied. None of that is actually inside their body. It's swirling around, rather than their body dysmorphia is very much internal. And it says a lot about how they perceive different emotions, if they feel like they are a part of them or not. And then again, we also started to bring it into hospitals as well. And so this is a gentleman with a very severe form of chronic pain who usually couldn't stand without support. So he would either have to lean against a wall or physically hold onto his left side. But because virtual reality has this fascinating ability to distract people from their pain, his consultant pain nurse was amazed to see him actually putting this headset on and drawing without holding himself up. And here he created this artwork that is expressive of his pain, and he started distinguishing between these two different types of pain, and then started to draw this pain in his head as well. And this is really interesting, where he started to talk about how his pain was affecting his emotions, how it was really changing the quality of his life, or reducing the quality of his life, because he couldn't do things, and then he was feeling depressed and sad. And so he ended up getting a new referral for mental health support alongside his pain as well. And so actually using this as a tool to talk about the whole human, to get them to tell stories about their entire mental and physical experience was really fascinating. But also towards the end, she was like, this is really interesting, because I feel like I could take this to another pain consultant, and based on these artworks, then you could potentially they could probably say what that condition was, which we thought was really interesting, of how this could aid that diagnosis, not just changing the conversation between a patient and a healthcare provider, but also how we could start to learn all the different ways that people experience their bodies with shared conditions as well. So we ended up doing some additional research, looking at how we could potentially start to embed AI and diagnostics into this, if we can start to tag these artworks with their known conditions. So this person has fibromyalgia, and then or whatever condition it is, more quantitative data about their backgrounds, you know, where in the world they come from, are they male or female, how old they are, and then combine it with these more qualitative drawings, and then look at trends in how people are visualizing their experiences. Then we're really interested in how this actually is a tool for expressing experience, could potentially create new forms of insight as well, both as a way of diagnosing conditions, but I'm really, as an anthropologist, I'm also really interested in what are the things that we can start to learn about people that perhaps we may not have known otherwise. So do older men in China illustrate chronic pain in the same way that young women might in Brazil? And how does language and culture inform the different ways that we talk about our bodies? Especially when it comes to color, then we have different relationships with colors around the world, and what that might mean to us. So that's something that we're really excited to be exploring. And because this is very much an artistic piece as well, we're really interested in how to kind of further push the expressiveness of the experience as well, and really have this as an experience that is artistically led, but scientifically backed as well. So we're really kind of working together now in collaboration with a range of really exciting scientists and researchers and artistic organizations as well, to rethink what are these brushes in that creation phase. Can you paint with electricity or fire or wind or smoke? And paint sonically as well, painting with sound, and how that can be more expressive. As part of that idea of thinking about, well, how can this also be a therapeutic tool? How can it be more transformative as well? Once you've created those artworks, what happens if you re-embody it and move with it, and think about how actually by moving with it and changing it, how we can also start to transform our relationship with our pain or different aspects of ourselves. And this aligns with lots of therapeutic principles about acceptance and compassion therapy with pain, and how instead of trying to fight these parts of ourselves, that we invite them in as something that we can be more caring towards and manage better. And then, of course, there's a real value in sharing these pieces as well, and realizing that lots of these feelings and pains and experiences we have can make us feel less alone as well, and that there is real therapeutic value in being able to connect with other people around it as well. So as we're really excited to bring this into healthcare context as well, we're really excited by how this can be used as a tool to start all of these new conversations about health as well. So what we're actually preparing to do now is launch it as a touring exhibition around the world as a way of reaching the public and being able to share it with people for the full launch. Use this as a really interesting way of developing new forms of research and insight into the ways that people can draw pain, emotion, positive feelings like falling in love or what your dreams look like. And really use this as an opportunity to speak to different people around the world about these different tools, how we can really make this artistic vision accurate, that we can create tools that enable people to feel like they can truly express themselves, and then develop these large quantities of user-generated content that can be really fascinating to explore and create opportunities for different venues to connect with each other as well. Another project that I wanted to talk about very briefly as well that I'm also involved in is an experience called Deep as well, which again is a very much artistically led experience that's backed by science that we developed with the Games for Emotional and Mental Health Lab. So I'm just going to play you the video very quickly. So Deep is, again, another artistically driven experience that brings together these kind of beautiful ways of interacting with a virtual reality experience, but that can be used as a healthcare intervention as well. So it was originally created as a tool for managing anxiety, but also has the qualities of VR as a tool to be able to reduce pain has also been really interesting to explore. So we had a PhD researcher that was working with the artist on the co-creation and sort of validation of the experience. But now we're working with a range of different research institutions to assess its ability to reduce pain in palliative care settings and more broadly, and how it can also be used for lung rehabilitation, specifically in long COVID as well. And how it can also be used in post-traumatic stress disorder in young people as well. But I think with all of these different experiences, then it's like, well, how does VR really push the potential of new forms of therapy? And that actually by creating these playful embodied experiences, that we can increase patient adherence and retention, and that we can create these more accessible embodied interactions. So we have a range of different ways that you can interact with the belt, with more Tai Chi style movements as well, or even using the controllers on a VR headset and putting it on your belly and that it's measuring your breathing there as well. And like I mentioned, we published lots of papers on it, found lots of really fantastic results, but again, have also brought it into a range of more artistic and publicly engaged contexts as well. So this is an installation version that we put in the Science Museum in Amsterdam as well. And you can read all of these papers that are open access as well if you'd like to find out more too. And lastly, before I wrap up as well, I just wanted to say that there is so many exciting things happening in the world of arts and VR in healthcare, particularly in pain management. I think is a really exciting time for it. But what I've noticed for a very long time is that often these industries are very fractured, and there's the healthcare industry that is increasingly interested in these interventions, and then there's the world of video games and the arts, and then research that sort of happens over there as well. And because they're very different industries, they often don't really overlap very much. But I think my work is very much about how we can bring all these different stakeholders together to make experiences that can improve human health, but also be accessible to people as well. And so with my other hat on, with the XR Health Alliance, then last year we released this report called The Growing Value of XR in Healthcare in the United Kingdom, that was us sort of taking opportunity to lobby the National Health Service and say, we really need to think about how we can collaborate more and make these experiences more accessible. So we did this report that's very extensive. It's free and online, a fully interactive experience that talks about all these different applications in VR in health. And there is a whole section on pain management as well that I would really urge you to have a look at if you wanted to find out a bit more as well. But I think we really need to think about how to work together more collaboratively to consider how these technologies can be available to the wider public as well, and how it can be through hospitals, GP practices, and even in libraries and galleries and museums as well. So that is my time, in fact. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you found it useful or interesting, and interesting perhaps. This is my contact details as well. So if you have any questions, then please feel free to reach out, and I'd love to talk to you about it more. Thank you very much.
Hello and good afternoon. My name is Tracy Harwood, and I'm here today to talk to you about the role of artificial intelligence art in the care of aging society. Now, by way of some background and context, I am Professor of Digital Culture at the Institute of Creative Technologies, de Montfort University, Leicester in the UK. My research is focused on the implications of emerging technologies, and particularly I work at the intersection of these things: interactive arts, networks, and creative computing. The bit in the middle is my focus, which is basically pushing cultural horizons. My recent publications have looked at implications of Internet of Things, usability and innovation, virtual, augmented, and mixed realities, interaction, design, and artificial intelligence. And I'm actually also passionate about knowledge exchange. And that is what has led me to develop a new festival, which in 2018 we launched, working in collaboration with colleagues in Leicester, including independent creative artificial intelligence curator Luba Elliott, the main local shopping centre, High Cross, and local digital media centre, Phoenix. And together we created and delivered an art AI festival, initially bringing in a few artists working in the field. In early 2019, we were recognised with a regional award. And later that year, we launched our second programme, this time bringing in more artists and collaborating with more venues in the city. Now, the goal of the festival is to showcase latest applications of artificial intelligence in the public realm, doing so through creative installations and artworks. Our aim has been to engage a general public audience with creative AI, with a view to stimulating wider debate, making AI more accessible to a wider range of people. And this has been a highly successful strategy. And our 2020 program, not only were we going to be showing an even bigger program, but that program was also going to be dovetailed to the Dubai Expo. Well, of course, COVID happened, and like the rest of the world, we paused. And in the end, I beg your pardon, in the end, we changed from our original short festival format and ran a 10-month-long program between May 2021 and March 2022. In fact, part of the program is still ongoing from that 2020 funded event. And we've had a mammoth delivery team with many local organisations involved and international artists participating, including 6 months with 2 installations at the British Pavilion in the Dubai Expo. These were in fact co-located artworks, so they simultaneously ran in Leicester too. Now, from this work, we again received amazing attention from local, national and international media. And in January this year, we became part of the National Science Festival Association. In fact, just in September, we ran another 4 installations and activities as part of the British Science Festival, which took place in Leicester this year. Now, to the role of AI art in the care of an ageing society. It's actually through the Art AI Festival work in 2019 that we placed a commissioned artwork in a local hospital's dementia outpatients department. Actually, my original goal was simply to give older people the opportunity to see a new type of artwork and reflect on how artificial intelligence had been used to create the work. The work was created by digital artist Jean Cogan. And our brief in discussion with the NHS Hospital Trust, where we placed the work, was to make it brightly coloured, psychedelic in some way, because the dominant images were these that I'm showing you now. These are contemporary images of AI artwork at the time that were often things presented in some kind of distorted way, such as faces by the portrait of Edmund de Bellamy in the obvious portrait on the right of your screen here, and the work by Mario Klingemann on the left. The work on the left is called Interstitial Space, and it was another piece of work that we commissioned for the 2019 festival that was based on the sale of his artwork at Sotheby's a couple of months before our festival. However, we felt these images would be disturbing and inappropriate for the care setting we had in mind. I can tell you a little bit more about that later, and pick it up in Q&A if you're particularly interested in that. So our artwork, this is what we commissioned. I'll let that play to give you a sense of what we showed. It's actually there's no sound with it. It's a generative artwork that has been made using Google's Deep Dream and Inceptionism algorithms. And you can see here how our brief to create a psychedelic piece has been interpreted. The work is brightly coloured and includes repeating images of everyday objects. You can perhaps see in here things that you might interpret as cats or dogs, birds, feathers, engineering shapes, houses, and so on. Its colours range from pink to blue to green, yellow and red and so on. They're vibrant, bright, continually moving, and it's really quite mesmerizing. In fact, it's reminiscent of those early kaleidoscopes you may have played with as a child in the 1960s and 70s, you know, those things that you put to your eye and twisted and watched how they moved around. So I'll let you just look at that a little bit more. So you can get a sense for what we showcased. There you can see some leaves, what you might interpret as leaves. just shapes, swirls, windows maybe, houses maybe, parts of buildings. Anyway, I'm not going to show you the whole thing. Now, alongside, I can just move on, alongside placing that work in the hospice, I worked with the support of a leading clinical expert on dementia, a lady called Professor Elizabeta Makatova-Ledinska. And we explored patients, carers, and staff responses to the work with a specific focus on the impacts of it on service users. Now, this was a really very small scale, effectively a pilot piece of work using observation and interviews only. It's not used any kind of clinical evaluations to assess responses. So our findings are based on basically 17 people taking part in a structured interview comprising 12 professionals, 2 people with dementia, and 3 carers. But nonetheless, our findings were very interesting, and we have subsequently published these in clinical journals. The first in OBM Geriatrics and the second in Archives of Psychiatry and Mental Health. Now, in the latter paper, we aim to draw attention to some of the ethical considerations in using AI in the care of dementia patients, of which, of course, there are many. In OBM Geriatrics, we drew on research which positions our work against findings of others about the calming effects art can have on people with dementia, where art is a non-pharmacological treatment for dementia, where it has been found to reduce anxiety and confusion, improve old-term memory and emotion regulation, and increase overall well-being of people with dementia. Albeit that we recognise that many studies we reviewed were what Elizabeta referred to as low quality. They've not used clinical evaluations. And of course, neither did we. It's one of the great limitations of what we were dealing with at that time. What we did find is that the calming effects of the AI installation were highlighted by 35% of users and participants in our preliminary study, which has been encouraging enough for us to develop a research program to explore more rigorously the therapeutic implications of these novel art forms for people with dementia. However, to date, we have not secured funding for the advanced research we wish to do that will explore the wider range of benefits and disbenefits from this kind of intervention at different stages of advancement of the disease. For our pilot study, the artwork was installed for 4 weeks at the outpatients department and was seen by 1,600 patients and 600 carers, amounting to a total of 2,200 visitors to the memory clinic and professionals working in the clinic. Elizabeta led on the development of a survey and the relevant ethics processes. The survey was based on a cut-down version of a PANAS questionnaire using 20 questions, evaluating positive and negative effects. So basically, emotional and cognitive responses to the artwork. From the observations we did, I think to the surprise of both Elizabeta and I, as we observed service users with the artwork, it became quite clear that its properties were therapeutic and calming to those that sat and watched it, although our study was of a much lower number of people in terms of the interviews that we did. And based on our hypotheses following that preliminary investigation, we are now seeking to conduct a larger scale clinical feasibility study, albeit the challenge that we're facing, and the reason we haven't secured the funding yet, is that we're working here both with generative art that is interactive with the patient alongside a clinical study that explores its impact. So we're still navigating this interdisciplinary nature of the work that we're now trying to do collaboratively. So it's not purely clinical study that we're looking at. Now, as an installation, this was a 3 minutes looped video without sound and displayed on quite a small plasma, a 55-inch plasma, placed above eye level as a person was seated and positioned. The screen was positioned in the corner of the room, which is what you saw which you can see on the screen. That image is what you can see there. The most memorable images ranged from diamonds and circles and squares to industrial images and animals. And interestingly, dementia patients and their carers reported more frequently images of objects, trees, houses, pipes, and animals such as a cat, which we think may be due to participants' familiarity and experience with the objects seen, rather than the technical items, the swirls and things that the images included. The most memorable colours differed between the professional and dementia patients and their carers as well, which for the patients and carers was pink and blue, where for the professionals it was a much wider range of colours, as one might really expect. And in the observational study, most of the comments that we picked up ad hoc were related to the impact of the installation itself. So labeling it as mesmerizing, psychedelic, relaxing, and making you sleepy. And it's interesting too that this artwork was also placed in a main library in central Leicester. And although I didn't get any questionnaire data back from that location, the qualitative feedback that we received from staff and visitors found just a few minutes in front of it was also very de-stressing and very calming. And whatever the local context that viewers found themselves in, that was the dominant kind of feedback that we received from it. And I think it's also worth noting in terms of research findings to date that modern art is appreciated by people with dementia. And in fact, the art that stimulates creativity and fantasy seems to be much more appreciated and stimulates interest among people with dementia. In the era of digital technologies, the exposure to an algorithm-created digital art is becoming much more of a reality. We've all seen the recent explosion of AI-generated images from algorithms such as DALL-E or Midjourney and Stable Diffusion posted across the internet in recent weeks. However, our thoughts are that digitally psychedelic and phantasmorganic images may trigger unexpected emotional responses and interactions and contribute to changing neuronal network dynamics, whilst enhancing fantasies, perhaps facilitating memories and communications. The novel opportunities of experiences with art using artificial intelligence to create generative work that responds to specific user needs are therefore quite exciting, regarding further stimulating senses, improving communication and overall enjoyment, besides being educational and entertaining. And furthermore, the incorporating psychedelic experiences within artwork may have additional impact on neuronal network dynamics of people with dementia in terms of modifying their personality, reducing anxiety and depression, as well as anti-inflammatory processes and increasing functional connectivity in both subcortical and cortical areas, as shown in studies using psychedelic drugs, but without the side effects of pharmacologically induced psychedelia, which include things like paranoia, anxiety, and delusions. And it is this that excites us about our preliminary findings in the work we've done so far, although we acknowledge that we need more insight to understand any negative effects, as well as the clinical effects on the disease condition of the patients. That's all I've got to say. So thank you very much for listening. I look forward to hearing any questions that you have.
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks so much for your sharing. So let's see what we have from the Q&A today. So the first question would be, in your observation, what are the major challenges for the care homes adopting AI art in their therapeutic use? And how would those challenges be tackled? What do you think, Tracy?
Yeah, okay. So I think one of the main challenges is to figure out what the AI is doing in the interactive process. So you know, really what I think the opportunities are with AI is that the artwork can interact with an individual and learn from an individual, so it becomes something that's kind of customized at the individual level. Doing what we did with this particular artwork, it was a generative piece. It wasn't actually interactive, but it was a closed loop, predefined piece that we put in a situation where people could choose to look at it or not. I guess what we don't understand really is what the physiological responses are to it, and that's because we really haven't done the clinical study. So my concerns would be that it's not having a detrimental effect on people. And I guess really that's what we need to understand. That's the work we need to do. That's the basis of the clinical investigation that we would like to do, to understand the actual physiological clinical responses to it before we do an awful lot more with it, let alone the customizable elements of it.
Right. So there's another question asking about what are the potential limitations of AI technologies that might affect their adoption, and what should the practitioners need to be aware of? What is your advice, Tracy?
Well, as I just said, really, there's a lot of ethical issues with it, really. One is what's the training data set that has been used? What are the images that are being used? One of the things we considered with this is, certainly at a customizable level, it's possible that you can use within the artwork images that the care user, if you like, or the patient is familiar with from their background. So you plug their own content into this process, but as I said, we just don't know what the risks or the clinical effects of it might be, and I genuinely think we need to do more on that before we let this sort of technology loose with this type of key audience.
Right. So here comes our third question. How would you see the impacts of VR installations and psychedelic of the AI-created art contributing therapeutic use in dementia in UK?
Yeah, it's a really interesting area for development, I think. I was fascinated to listen to your previous speaker, Sarah, and some of the things that she was saying about the altered sense of body that you have in terms of pain management. I mean, from the very low level study that we've done, we genuinely think that the psychedelic effects of the artwork are probably very similar to what you might get with a drug-based response. And if it is, and this is where the studies need to, prove that case really. If it is the same, then why use the drug-based response and why not use the artwork instead without affecting somebody's body with all the potential side effects that you might get from using the drug? I certainly would consider that a more viable and longer term potential option rather than have to deal with whatever the drugs might do to your body as well. And if you plug that into a VR system where somebody is completely immersed in it, do they need to be in there so long? What are the effects of that? I don't know. I mean, immersion, how quickly that can be achieved, how you can kind of maintain that, what the side effects of that might be. I would imagine that, yes, you can achieve a de-stressing kind of experience, but maybe what you get out of that is somebody completely disorientated, and then are they able to reconnect to their body after that experience? Again, I suspect we don't really know. Fascinating to consider it, I think. Definitely something I'd be interested in looking at, but I'd do it with caution at this stage.
Right. Thank you so much, Tracy, for being with us today.
Hello. 大家好啊，大家好。咁好多謝頭先嗰3位講者啦。咁我估大家都學到好多嘢啊，嗬。咁因為咁我自己就係即係團結香港基金做藝術及呢個文化政策嘅研究嘅。咁其實咧好高興啦，今日就即係得到呢一個樂齡科技嘅高峰會嘅邀請。咁其實咧我哋團隊咧咁啱喎，就係其實喺過去嗰幾年咧，真係有鑽研一啲同我哋嗰陣時就講話，即係藝術與健康嗰個 cross over 嘅一啲研究啦。咁另外其實我哋都有做 arts tech 即係藝術科技相關嘅一啲研究嘅。咁所以咧就見到即係我哋今次呢一個 topic， 我哋今次呢一個 workshop 呢個 panel 咧 ，exactly 就係去討論呢一個即係喺海外或者喺香港嚟講，點樣可以將 arts tech 同埋頭先所講嘅 arts and health 層面可以做到 cross over 咧，咁樣咁，所以咧都好慶幸啊，同大家可以係去討論下嘅。咁我可能做一個好快嘅總結啦，即係頭先我哋都聽到咁多精彩嘅一啲內容啊，嗬。咁其實第一位講者佢阿 Tom 啦，就嚟自 Netherlands 啦，咁佢就其實佢係講翻佢 PhD 係咪嘅一個研究，咁佢講到佢講咗2個 highlights 嘅，就係佢喺佢嗰個即係 elderly home 嗰度咧，咁佢就係去研發咗有一個同窗，即係佢將一啲 digital art 就擺咗去，即係install 咗好似一個窗咁，等啲老人家可能望出去，你會見到唔同嘅 content， 可能見到自己個孫女喺度同自己揮手啊，嗰啲嘢啦，係咪？咁另外一個咧就係一個喺桌面上面嘅一個裝置藝術，咁就係有啲可能即係你知可能喺外國。譬如喺朝頭早嘅時候會見到啲 morning dew， 即係嗰啲係嗰啲草，即係好 nature 嘅一啲現象，咁佢就呈現咗出嚟。咁其實佢就話見到咧呢2種係你可以話係互動式嘅 arts tech 藝術科技 digital art 嘅一啲裝置咧，其實就令到可能有啲有認知障礙症嘅老人家，甚至係佢嘅即係照顧者，其實係會多咗共通嗰啲溝通嘅一種內容啦，即係可能佢哋會講嘢會講多咗嘅，因為有 common topics 咁樣，咁亦都會令到啲認知障礙症嘅一啲老人家咧，會係覺得比較 calm 嘅，即係可能佢哋個心亦都會定啲。咁其實你可能大家都會講咁定啲，咁即係係咪即係咁直接？咁但係除咗咁直接嘅一啲 benefits， 其實仲會帶嚟有啲咩好處咧？咁樣咁，但係其實即係可能大家都會知道啦，即係認知障礙症嘅一啲病人啦，或者一啲長者，其實係你唔可以淨係從一個角度去睇嘅，即係可能佢哋個心靜咗落嚟啦，或者佢同佢同佢個照顧者嗰一個嘅感情係培養到一個好良好嘅一個狀態，其實可能對於佢食藥啊，或者佢一啲認知障礙症嘅一啲病發，即係 side effects，其實都會係比較控制得好嘅。咁所以千祈唔可以淨係覺得就係話咁佢 calm 咗，咁其實咁有啲咩？咁除咗咧咁樣，咁我覺得呢個係幾有趣嘅，即係阿 Tom 佢用咗呢2個example 係同我哋去介紹佢自己做嘅嘢啦，即係其實個 interactive art 點樣可以令到認知障礙症嘅長者或者喺 nursing homes 裏邊得到有一個 emotion oriented， 呢個係佢用嘅 term 啦 ，emotion oriented 嘅一個科技咧咁樣。咁另外有一個重點想提一提嘅就係你會見到喺呢3個講者裏邊，佢哋講到嘅一啲 projects 咧，其實都有後續嘅。咁呢一個我哋香港要諗一諗嘅，就係佢永遠唔會係 project base 一次性之後就冇咗。即係譬如 Tom 嗰個，佢之後係商業化咗嘅，變成一個 commercial 嘅 product。就係頭先我話即係嗰個窗口嗰個裝置藝術咧，而家好似已經係佢個 IP 已經出咗去可以賣㗎啦，咁樣咁就會變咗，即係嗰個普及化嗰樣嘢會做到啦。咁好快啦 move 去我哋第2位講者 Sarah 啦。咁 Sarah 就有佢比較講嘅咧係一個用 VR 用呢個 VR 嘅科技係點樣去融入嗰個 healthcare 嘅層面，特別係 pain management 嗰一個嘅層面。咁佢就佢用咗佢 specifically 係用有2個，或者我可能呢度講1個咧，有一個 technique 就係叫 body mapping 啦。咁佢就講到就係話有好多人可能佢淨俾咗個例子，戴住咗個 VR 跟住你入到去之後，你會見到自己個即係 body shape 啦。咁佢有講到話，佢其中有一個長者咧，其實係完全係企唔到嘅，即係佢係已經覺得好痛㗎啦，因為佢成日都即係佢要佢企喺度咧都要挨住啲嘢先至會企得好。但係唔知點解咧，一戴咗呢個 VR 之後咧，唔知係 distraction 啦，定係分咗佢注意力啊，定係點咧？佢會唔即係佢就可能進入咗另一個空間，就平衡到喎，跟住又唔使扶住自己喎。咁佢哋當然就呢個係其中一個例子啦。咁當然亦都有好多嘅一啲科學根據，佢哋做咗好大量嘅一啲 research 係去 back 呢一個佢所謂藝術家主導，但係就科技去做支撐嘅一啲研究報告。咁呢一個又係香港可以學到嘅啦，就係我哋有好多時頭先都有講到，就係話我哋啲項目可能其實好多元化嘅，同埋即係可能有好多唔同嘅慈善機構都會係分緊好多唔同香港嘅一啲即係點樣去透過藝術啊，或者透過科技係去幫到唔同一啲弱勢社群嘅一啲項目。咁但係可能過咗3年，過咗5年長啲啦。但係就冇咗㗎啦，冇咗嗰個後續性。咁但係你會見到喺我哋海外嘅講者唔同佢哋嘅sharing 嗰度咧，你會見到係永遠都有一個後續。佢哋有一個即係無論係商業化啊，或者係點樣去透過同大學嘅一啲合作，係去持續到或者支撐到嗰個 academic 嗰一個嘅research base。我覺得呢個係非常之重要。咁係啦，咁跟住之後，阿 Sarah 亦都講咗一樣嘢，就係佢自己亦都代表住，即係佢又係藝術家咁樣。佢之前佢又代表住有個 alliance 啦，佢就叫做 XR Health Alliance。咁就係會撰寫咗一份 paper，就係即係佢個名就叫 The Growing Value of XR and Healthcare in the UK。咁佢就 lobby 同政府去 lobby 嘅，即係同 NHS 啊，同啲hospitals 啊，同唔同嘅 GP 啊。即係啲醫生係一去 lobby 點樣可以透過 XR 其實係融入嗰個醫療嘅體制咧。咁呢一個好創新。咁呢個亦都係令到我諗起我哋即係譬如喺香港，可能之前嗰份報告啦，都有睇過呢一個藝術同埋醫療層面點樣可以將藝術係融入到呢一個醫療層面咧。咁其實 arts on prescription 就係一樣，即係我哋嗰陣時有睇過嘅嘢啦。即係其實arts interventions，你會見到喺我哋頭先嗰3位講者裏邊嘅 sharing， 其實好突出嘅一個 finding 就係其實藝術已經喺醫療層面嘅啦，已經係 legit， 即係一個好正式同埋正統嘅一個被接受嘅一個 method。咁但係我哋香港可能就即係未係好話會去推呢一件事啦。咁我亦都知道喺坊間，即係喺香港其實有唔同嘅大學，可能其實都係做緊類似嘅 project。咁但係呢一啲 project 可能其實係佢哋嘅多媒體學院係去帶領或者統籌嘅，但係可能喺個 project proposal 嗰度，佢唔會咁強烈咁樣係去推廣自己係用藝術科技。佢可能會比較都係講我哋係用 assistive technology 啊，未必係會好有自信咁係去推我哋係用一個藝術家嘅角度係去點樣去將係去係咯，即係去 link 我哋嘅即係創意同埋呢一個嘅醫療嘅，或者係健康身心健康咁樣。咁呢一個我覺得係可能我哋都可以諗下嘅，即係喺香港嚟講。咁同埋另外一樣嘢想帶出咧，就係頭先Tracy 其實都有講到嘅，就係話即係 digital 同埋 modern art 咧，唔好覺得佢係老人家唔識欣賞咯。即係同埋我覺得頭先 Tracy 呢一句講得好好嘅，亦都令我諗起阿 Tom 佢有一句都係講得好好。佢就係講話，佢講過一句，佢有張 slide 就係寫住話 cognitive level of the interface 係並不等於 cognitive level of the aesthetic。嘅意思就係即使啲老人家可能係唔識得用 tech 或者唔係好 tech savvy， 但係並不等於我哋整俾佢嘅裝置藝術一定要係好 childish 或者係好似俾小朋友玩咁樣咯。咁我覺得呢一個係即係我哋大家都要諗啦。作為可能想幫社會、想幫唔同人士嘅一班人，即係其實嗰個 interface of 我哋而家研發出嚟嘅嗰啲 arts tech projects 或者嗰個 artwork， 其實係好影響到啲人。你嗰個受眾其實係會係咪即係 experience 到所有嘢嘅咁樣。咁係啦，咁呢一個就係我覺得幾得意嘅幾大重點啦。咁其實仲有另一樣嘢啦，頭先我講咗，有一個好重要嘅 takeaway 就係香港嗰個嘅藝術同埋醫療層面嘅 crossover 係並唔係好直接嘅而家，同埋即係其實未係好入到，即係譬如 Department of Health 啊或者 HA 啊，即係我哋都有我哋要繼續係去 lobby 嘅，係咪？咁而即係我喺呢度都好想帶出我哋團結香港基金可能第一份報告裏邊有倡議過嘅一個概念啦，就叫做藝術處方概念，就叫 Arts on Prescription， 其實都係嚟自英國嘅。咁但係英國佢哋 adopt 咗之後，其實世界唔同，即係唔同世界各地嘅經濟體慢慢 uptake 啦。新加坡得咗啦，即係新加坡行緊啦，台灣都行緊啦。跟住當然即係歐洲、東歐嗰啲地方一早已經係進行緊呢一個嘅藝術處方概念。咁係咩嚟嘅咧？其實就有少少好似就係話佢唔係即係 instead of 去睇醫生，跟住醫生俾藥你食咧，你就其實佢就會可能係 prescribe 你去一個唱 choir 或者係去睇 digital art fair 或者去睇一啲 digital art。咁然之後頭先我哋3位講者都有講到好多治療性，即係睇 psychedelic 啊或者睇一啲 digital art， 其實可以令到身心可能平復落嚟啊，或者對於個 mental health 有幫助嘅一啲 effects。咁即係我哋點樣可以將呢樣嘢普及化？即係點樣可以令到多啲人都可以係透過睇 art tech 或者透過睇一啲藝術文化嘅參與而得到一個身心嘅健康咧。咁呢一個其實我哋仲有好長嘅路要走嘅，喺香港嚟講。咁當然最後2點就係嗰個後續啦，我講咗啦，就係即係你見到嗰3位講者全部都係有 plan 嘅，即係佢 either 係 research base 啦，或者係之後 commercialize。咁我覺得呢個香港要諗一諗嘅，永遠我哋唔應該係就咁當個 project 完咗就算啦。跟住最後就係非常之重要，就係嗰個 golden triangle 啦，就係即係你要有政府嘅 support， 然之後要 backed by 大學嘅 research， 跟住之後就 industry 去做嗰個 service provider， 先至係會行到任何嘅一啲 policy change 咯。咁所以我就希望即係大家都喺呢一個 session 啦，學到嘢啦，咁都一齊係去 lobby 或者繼續去 advocate 呢一個 art tech for health 嘅呢一個 movement。多謝。